And welcome, everyone. Let me go ahead and send it over to Michelle so she can welcome us for today.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Wendy. Hi, everyone. I'm so delighted that you're all here at the lunchtime hour for our webinar on emotional intelligence. And Michelle Tenzik, I'm the president of East 10th Group, and we are a boutique consulting firm that provides people strategy, leadership development, and executive coaching services. And we are fiercely committed to helping leaders and their businesses thrive in today's complex environment. And we generally partner with growth enterprises and middle market businesses that need strategic leadership and human capital insight, perspective, and experience to grow and sustain their efforts. And this is one way that we do this, is provide a webinar just like this, a very relevant topic in today's environments on emotional intelligence. And so with that, I'm going to pass the baton right back to Wendy Wollner, who is the CEO of Balancing Life's Issues, a terrific strategic partner of East 10th Group, and also to Faeth, one of our terrific leadership advisors and executive coaches, who's going to take you through the topic of emotional intelligence. And I really look forward to an engaging, wonderful hour with all of you. Thank you. Wendy, over to you.
Yeah, that was a great kickoff. So welcome, everyone, to what is one of our most favorite topics to talk about, emotional intelligence, and it ultimately making us a better leader, honestly, a better human being. So this is, we're going to have a lot of fun here today. Frank and I are going to sort of host. We love this class to be super engaging. It's on mute just because we are recording this class, but also because we do want to have a nice, quiet environment. But there's this amazing chat feature. I look at it all the time. We never share your names. It's totally confidential. So you'll see me write hi. You can ask us anything. Just be sure you send to, I'm the presenter or the host or whoever you want to send the note to. And again, we make these classes totally engaging, totally participatory. So please do not need to wait to the end to ask a question or a comment or challenging mind. We love to hear the critical thinkers in the room. And so as we delve through a topic and talk about emotional intelligence, certainly most of us have heard the word before, and we really love to talk about especially Yale's work. I was lucky enough to start studying with three gentlemen, Peter Mayer, Salvin Caruso. Peter Mayer now is the president of Yale and has gone on to really found this Center for Emotional Intelligence. And really what the core, I'm going to date myself here. I was lucky enough to get involved in emotional intelligence, but I want to tell you my 1-minute true story how I got involved. At the time, I was a single mom. I had started my work balance company, and my older son was 10. I'll fast forward and let you know he's now in medical school. He's 28, so I'm back a long time. I hear him on the phone with his buddy, his friend, saying, "Oh, your mother's dead? So what time are we going to the movies?" And I'm horrified, and I'm like, "Oh my goodness, here's a kid who's been reading encyclopedias for, since he was 3 or 4, and I could not believe how crass he was on this call. And so when he got up, I called him over and I was like, "What's going on with that? What's the deal? How do you think your friend feels about his grandmother dying?" And there's dead silence. And he just looked at me like a deer in headlights saying, "I have no idea what you're talking about." And Frank is laughing because I'm sure many of us know someone like that is so smart and doesn't get it. And so I started personally getting involved in emotional intelligence. Around the same time, Faeth and Caruso were studying this hypothesis of how come being a valedictorian of a super, very selective college like a Harvard or Yale or UCLA or an Oxford doesn't predict success. And this is the beginning of emotional intelligence. So for many of us, it's a new field, right?
But before you go to the next slide, I was going to mention, too, that one of the important points just made is that there's not necessarily a correlation between EQ and IQ, which you're going to get into later. They're very, very distinct. And also, when we tell people to label their emotions, sometimes the missing piece is language itself. What words do we use to express how we are feeling? Many people think it's very soft language, or it's not body language. It can actually be just a term that you like, that you use, that expresses what you're about to say, or body language sometimes. So, it's very much when you go to the hospital, what's your pain level? Sometimes you need to point out it's a 6 or a 7 with a smiley face. So that's a way of labeling things too. That's a way of naming it so you can indeed tame it.
Yeah, I appreciate the fact that we are new to the game. I've been lucky enough to teach this pretty much all over the world. I've had the opportunity to work in China, in Mexico, in Israel, and actually in Cuba. And so it's amazing to see how many things we as American companies are really good. Many of us are in global companies, but we also want to take a step and say, where do we need to grow? And one of the questions are, can you have access to the slide at the end? Absolutely. We absolutely have no problem sharing the deck. So certainly we'll ensure that you get that. You'll also be able to have access to the recording as well. So keep the questions coming. And thank you. Some of you are saying that you can relate to the opening story. I really wanted to walk us through the idea that this is a full-year business course. I have a degree in industrial psychology at Penn. Has more of an emphasis on positive psychology and emotional intelligence. Harvard Business School has a little bit of a different twist. They work on happiness and emotional intelligence. So every school has a different, little bit of a different lens. But the reality is emotional intelligence can be trained. So we know that for a fact, just like IQ, you can start at lower, get to a higher. I finished, with my son who's in medical school. This is a full-year course in medical school. As a matter of fact, I spoke to him early this morning, and we chit-chat in the morning, and it was interesting because he's working in neuroscience as we speak, and the first thing they learn to do is how to ask questions to make patients feel comfortable. That's emotional intelligence.
Right. And there's a very famous practitioner in that world that he's also an executive coach, and that's David Rock, right?
Yep.
He runs the Neuro Leadership Institute, and he talks about how emotion and brain work together, and how you can develop a facility over time to become more emotional and be more emotionally aware.
Today is walk you through a process of start from beginning to end, and it's a great overview. So I'm a visual learner, and so because we're on the web, I'm going to do a visual example. So, ever have a glass of wine? Ever drink a glass of wine?
I try to, yes.
There you go. So for those of us like Frank and I that may once in a while have a glass of wine, this is a very good way to understand emotional intelligence. If Frank or I were to walk into a wine store, Frank, if I were to walk into a liquor store today and just say, get me a bottle of wine, what might the wine person say to me?
Well, what do you like? What have you tried before?
There you go. If I said red, they might say what?
Dry, sweet, light, bold.
Yes. So it's a very good analogy for asking probing questions so that at the end of the day, if I walk in and say, I want a Pinot Noir, I want to spend this much money, I want this kind of grape, I want this kind of region, I'm going to get the wine I want. And so for us, we need to understand the average human being goes through about 208 emotions a day, and we're aware of about 4. So I ask you to take advantage of the chat. Again, welcome to those of you who just joined. And send me or Frank or to all panelists, probably the best way to do it, send us a chat right now. How are you feeling? Let's see how we're going to do a quick little litmus taste. Send off some notes on how you're feeling. And again, we've got a tired. Here we've rest. Keep more of you curious, happy, excited, intrigued, overwhelmed. Oh no, computer technical.
Aggravated, yeah.
Yep, aggravated, a little excited. We've got a little excited,
okay.
intrigued, energized, exhausted, hungry. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got data. And so for those of us who are leaders and want to continue our leadership, this gives us a ton of information. In an organization, I'm running a meeting, I want to know how someone's feeling. I want to know where their base point is. So I then say, if they're hungry, maybe the best thing to do would be what, Frank?
Give them some, let me ask some questions, right?
Yes.
Be aware.
Absolutely. And so again, if we look at the facts about emotions, they are a moment in time. They give you data that helps you move forward. So it's an idea for a leader to stop and say, how are you feeling? And for some, curious, engaged, excited, great. For those of you who are saying stress is a mood that is made up of minimally 6 emotions. Some good, some not so good. So I need more. So now we're in the wine section, but I need more data. So I stop. Questions, comments. Frank, anything you want to add?
Well, one of the points you just made was very, very important. And that's you really have to ask people what thinking and what they're feeling. You can't make the presumption that you know. When I was in the wine store, I could not make the presumption that you wanted red wine. I had to ask that question. So work with other people. We have to ask them the direct question, what's happening today? What do you think about this? Tell me more. It's really a process of inquiry.
As we get better and better, at first the question, right, the uncomfortableness of how you're feeling, because what are you doing when you put me on the couch? So there's a cultural change that says, you know what, we're going to change cultures, we're going to change conversations, we're going to change the way, because I really want to know. I want to know how you're feeling, and people are going to say, wow, I want to tell Wendy, I want to tell Frank, because look, they actually are interested, and they actually made changes. I mean, to know, like, the Googles and Facebooks, when I work there, what's amazing to me is they'll change a meeting. If people are not feeling super excited and engaged, if they're worried, if they're overwhelmed, they'll cancel a meeting. They'll say, you know what, this is not a good time to have the meeting because they're already feeling negative. So next step, in China, I have to tell you what they do with the kindergartners, because I think this is so brilliant. They have an emoticon sticker chart, and when the kid at 5 walks in, they pick the emoticon of how they're feeling. Cool that, and then the teacher knows that little boy is sad, that little girl is happy. So I know, and then able to better plan.
Really, when adults text each other now and they use emoticons,
Yep.
that's more in one little sign than a whole paragraph can do. They carry weight.
Absolutely. And of course, we're living in a social media world where we can, tweet something in 140 characters. So being careful about your language, being careful about, for those of you who wrote stress, I would really push you to say, what did you mean by stress? What does stress mean to you? How much more information can I have?
And how does that affect your decision making? How does it affect the next thing you're going to do? And how does it affect your motivation?
Exactly where we're going to go. So we've identified our emotions. We've taken a step back, able to identify them. And I have to tell you, just like the wine class, then able to label it. I'm going to use an example here. When my father passed away, people would say to me all the time, you're sad. And for some reason, it made me angry. I couldn't understand why I got angry. And then I realized I was not sad that my father died. I was despondent that my father died. There's a big difference between sad and despondent. And so when we say we have to understand emotions, we have to understand emotions that we don't normally use. We have to get sophisticated. So I'm going to ask you the hardest question of today's web. So drum roll here. What's the emotion that we want you to feel that a leader should be a tone? What is the most productive emotion that humans have? What's the name of the emotion? See if you can just guess. And just little guys, send me off some ideas. What's the emotion that is going to make your organization the most productive? Guesses, hold on, let me just see. We've got, okay. Excited, enthusiasm, encouraging, confidence. I love these. Engager, close. Go even more. Go higher. Go even more. Okay, close. Passion's the closest one we've gotten. I'm tempted to give that person the praise, feeling value, and all of these are true. But logically, it's the emotion that actually drives confidence. It's the emotion that drives compassion. It's the emotion that drives appreciation. It's the emotion that drives flow and confidence. So, first of all, great job, guys. Really feeling the love over here, so thank you. The emotion is actually ecstasy. So last time you felt ecstatic at work. I'm waiting for everyone to say, this morning. Our job as leaders is to create an environment that is as ecstatic as possible, to that feeling. And so for some of us, that's the idea of understanding when's the last time we felt ecstasy, what does it mean for me? You and I may disagree. I've learned this as a CEO. I love doing these webinars. The more people, the more engagement. I'm good about the little noises and it drives me to a state of ecstasy. I want to do a great job. Frank, I know, feels the same way. Anyone on the phone ever would get anxious about public speaking? Anybody different than Frank and I? And nervous about public speaking?
Well, they say the public speaking is the most terrifying thing that any one human does.
I think it's a great example of how we get the same exact event and two different emotional responses.
Right.
So it's really about understanding our emotions and understanding that in our workplace, the top performers are ones of the people who get it. In the political world, you'll call this the likability factor. In the business world, you call this the top performers, the revenue generated world. In the medical world, you'll call this the healthier people. And just on this slide, I got to tell you, we have emotional intelligence eating, we have emotional intelligence parenting, we have emotional intelligence leadership, which we're obviously talking about today, and we also have, interestingly enough, emotional intelligence and the healthcare professional. So all different ways you can go.
Wendy, that there's a different kind of emotional intelligence that might vary by the kind of work we do?
Yes. How amazing is that? So it's at a time, right, and clearly we have a lot of benefits, we have a lot of buy-in, but if we think about a time out whether we're in a type of environment, like I'll use an example. When I rolled out this program for an insurance organization, and we were working with actuaries that really do, for the part, work with numbers, work with pie charts. So that's a different kind of emotional intelligence. That's a different type of fastidious to get that job done, versus an HR person who has so many different issues going on, versus a CEO who may be going through a merger and acquisition. I mean, how different are those, Frank?
Oh, significant, yes. The other thing, too, that you have the first bullet point here on the job. What you're talking about here is that highly emotional, intelligent people are really good at resolving. That's your second point, resolving conflict, because a wonderful balance between assertiveness and cooperativeness. They're very open. They're willing to listen. They're willing to hear, and they're willing to debate in a non-threatening way. And the way you approach that does vary by the context in which you're managing.
Self-awareness part here. Good way to check in here is if the phone rings and a deadline changes. If the phone rings and the CEO wants to see you. If the phone rings and even, as happened to me, my kids have been in a car accident. Your first response is a good way to measure how emotional intelligent you are. Bring on, I can handle it, right? So how many of these characteristics do you match? I mean, how many of you, Eddie wearing a watch? Frank, do you by chance have a watch on?
I do have a watch on me. I just got one.
Oh, yes, you do me a huge favor, and I have to credit Marshall Goldsmith for this. So Frank, take your watch off for me, okay?
Okay.
Let me go ahead and put it on the other wrist.
It's off.
And put it on the other wrist.
A little more time because I'm not as fast with my left hand.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, there we go.
How's it feeling?
Oh, it feels awkward.
I love it. So intelligent people that are teaching agents are people that first do what Frank said. You have no idea how many people I coach when I'll tell them, move watch, and their first response is, oh, no, I can't do that. My wrists are different sizes. It won't work. Person going to manage in your organization.
Oh, reactionary.
Yep. Anyone work with someone like this? Oh, you would sew my watch, but no, not today. But yeah, it's a great idea, but not for me. Anyone, someone like that? The yeah butters?
Well, and sometimes people like that, they're not sure how to use their emotional intelligence to affect others around them. So they only see one side of that discussion, which is what does it mean to me? They're not what does it mean to others?
Yes. And we look what Frank is describing, how empathetic are they? How willing, perfect segue, right? Or how willing are they to change? How many new ways do you change? Hey, you guys, do a self-assessment. How many of you eat new foods? How many of you try new hairstyles? How many of you go a different way when you commute? How many of you are willing to try a different vacation plan? I mean, how open to new experiences are you? And how open are you to saying, I need to someone in my life that's different than me? So empathy, and MIT has probably done one of the largest studies on this. So empathy is not a born skill. So for you who think you're born with it or not, that's an absolute fallacy. So that's number one. And number two is it's something that we need to be taught. Reading, writing, arithmetic, and empathy. Tell me why you feel that way. Tell me why you voted that way. Tell me why you bought that. Tell me why you care about that. Tell me why you think that will work, and tell me why it won't work. So it's really caring deeply of someone else's thought process.
Yeah. So, Wendy, on that point, there's a wonderful new book called Mind Wise by Nicholas Epley, exactly on your point. And he did a survey. He had people who had been together for many years, typically married couples or people unmarried but together for a long time. He had the most basic questions about the other person, and they're right 20% of the time. And from that was that you have to ask somebody what they're feeling. They can't make the assumption that you know.
Interesting, because even in my own world, right, I train every day, and when a trainer will come to me and say somebody is the most difficult, a site is really challenging to go to, one of the things that's important is I'll mystery shop, and I'll say, okay, what does difficult mean? Because that word is confusing. So really, truly putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, and just one real life takeaway here, leaders to learn empathy. This goes before emotional intelligence. It's the Gestalt therapy. So we're going back to Frederick Pearl's days. If anyone's into really hardcore therapy, they'll recognize those names. And they call it the empty chair. And so I do this a lot in my organization. I'll say, okay, I'm going to play the other person. I'm actually going to get up from my chair and be Frank. And I'm going to like to spend a day in the world of Frank. And what do I need to do differently? So sometimes as we do these classes, people want to drill down more and more and more. And so this is a great slide to roll out to your teams, to your families, for yourself. You know, talked about asking people how they are, not to be afraid to share emotions. Leaders need to set limits by sharing their emotions. So if you're familiar with Brene Brown's work, I'll send it off in a text. She does many TED Talks on vulnerability. She talks about a leader sharing what I'm scared, what I'm nervous. Certainly my team is very used to the Wendy's anxious about this. So leaders are going to set the tone, and then they're going to take a pulse of the tone. That's where teams begin to bond together. So get through their anxiety, and they move on. So, Fred, I'm
sure going to say, that was a perfect lead-in, that when you reduce anxiety, you also lower the risk for the whole group. You say, I'm open to talking about something, and this is we'll get to this later, it's a trusted environment where I feel confident that what I say will be respected, and I'm going to say it in a non-evaluative way, because I'm not sure how other people are going to react, but whatever I say will be acknowledged by others as something that is serious to me, and that I'm being truthful in what I'm saying.
I think one of the buy-ins about emotional intelligence, for me personally, is tell me what you really think and feel. Go back to my kids' example, because it's a safe place to say. I think many of us want to be great parents. We want to be great partners. The idea is tell me what I need to do better. So you hear those words from an emotionally intelligent leader. What do I need to do to get better? The difference is when we did a coaching session this morning with someone who said, you know, I'm really great now. Like, forget that, right? Like, I'm really great. really great, Frank, really. I'm good enough.
I'm sure.
And you could see how demoralizing that can be to our team.
We'll be shut down right away.
Right. I do health coaching. It's somebody saying to me, I have no idea how I gained the weight, but I really haven't gained that much weight. But it's somebody else's fault that I gained the weight, Frank. You know that, right?
Of course.
Yeah. So interesting about this, as you start to be aware of it, all of a sudden these people will pop into your brain. I use an extreme example of a client I worked with, but I think it's very real, and you'll tell me if you know someone like this. At the end of every meeting, everybody knows the meeting is over. People are getting ready to leave. They're putting their coats on if it's winter. They're cleaning up. They're turning the lights off. The party is over. That I have to go up to him and literally say, the meeting is ending. We are leaving. And he said to me, I don't know how you knew that, Wendy. How do on the scale can be anything from the, I just need tweaking on these points, I need more sophistication, I need a better literate language, all the way to that I've really missed an entire group's organization. I didn't know that this was coming. And to look at your organization, you're allowing people to express even their most extreme feelings.
Right. Where does trust fit within the world of emotional intelligence? What do you think?
You know, for most of us, I'm going to send off a book here that some of you have heard of that talks to this by Carl Sandburg. So I got to tell a story about that, okay, Frank?
Sure, go ahead.
So if you were to help me and I came to you and I said, Frank, I'm going to buy a house. Okay, Frank? Will you buy my house?
Sure, I'll help you.
Oh, but I don't know what to look for in the house. What should I look for? What's written in my house?
What are your needs? You know, what does it have to be? How big
I
does it
want
have
a
to be?
10-bedroom house. I want to know, I have these ridiculous things, and let's say I get everything. At the end of the day, what might be the most important thing for me to really look at in my house?
It would be practicality and closeness to work.
Okay.
And affordability.
Okay. So if we check all these out,
Right.
It's a good analogy. And by the way, Frank and I did not rehearse that.
We did not.
We did not. So what happens is that's our immediate thought process. And so you're thinking, what does this have to do with Frank's question about trust? You know, really the most important thing in a house, and we'll take a step back, is the foundation. Right? If I crack in my house in the foundation, Frank, what could happen to my house? But it's possible that we take it for granted. Mm-hmm. The foundation of an organization, the foundation of a human being is you've got this. Right? You say to Frank says to me, Wendy will be on the web at 11:30, and Frank says, you know, there's something about Wendy that I trust that she's going to do that. She made me feel confident in her ability. Really, right?
Yeah. Right. The other thing which I think you might be getting to is that, you know, in Lencioni's book about dysfunctions of a team, foundational layer is trust.
Yep.
Right?
So clearly, as you go on from emotional intelligence, and I sent off a book called Taming Your Gremlins. People usually like resources. You know, a foundation of emotional intelligence is trust. So it's confidence. It's all pieces. And someone said, oh my God, I'm surprised by that of people not being aware. And, you know, I think it's so interesting in that. And by the way, I've seen leaders, Fortune 50 CEOs, know when something is done, or know how to respond to the death of an employee. So, I mean, the assumption that someone is good at this, the assumption that someone understands trust is a really, really core value. And once you start teaching emotional intelligence, what starts ending up happening is, and I want to be clear about this, is people are then at a more open conversation where they say, you know what, I'm on a team with Mary or Jane or John, it doesn't matter, and I'm worried that they're not going to get their job done. Let me tell you, that is an awesome conversation to have, because better you have the conversation before than after the job is done either incorrectly or late. And so what Frank is asking is, how does emotional intelligence change the culture of your organization? It allows you to communicate about everything. I came in about self-awareness. So I think it's incredibly important. Questions are way more important than the Frank and Wendy show or the Wendy Frank show. Absolutely. Self-awareness means that you have done your intake. And let me tell you, you can use your own 360. Have the depth of relationships with key people. So when you're doing your own self-awareness, and the question, when you're taking your own self-awareness, you're saying, you're asking yourself probing questions. Am I a go-to person? Are people telling me how to feel about things? Are they sharing? And the second one is it enough? Do you want it more? I worked with an organization, again, a sort of extreme example, but very real, where the manager hired me. He said, look, they love me. They love me. When I walked in, you could see the parting of the sea. Nobody would sit next to him. And they came up to me at the break and they said, can you ask him to leave so we can actually share what's going on? So I call it get on the scale. You've got to be willing to say, what else do I need to do? Michelle's going to talk about this at the end, about how coaches can help you do this and programs can help you have a better self-awareness. I'll share with you, I don't think I'm ever done on this. I mean, even if I thought I was done on one moment, everything else changes. For me, it's always been a phone call. I mean, really in my life, it's always been either a good or a bad phone call. And so I was really self-aware yesterday, and today something happened, and now I had to readjust.
That's a very good point. And, you know, we know that over time, EQ can change because we become more aware of our emotions and how to use them in everyday life. And it's the easiest approach that can make a difference. For example, when I have clients who are typically sometimes not emotionally intelligent, I'll say do some small things, you know, say good morning to somebody at the dry cleaner or get coffee, you know, how are you today? Sometimes people don't use emotional intelligence because they're afraid to have that initial conversation that can really open up the relationship between two people, even if it's just something which is very transactional.
So it's interesting, the question came in, okay, but I trusted someone and they took advantage. Listen, I'm divorced, and I'm divorced twice. While that's a personal example, I've had disappointments, both at work or at home. Disappointment begins to change our foundation. So when you've been disappointed about someone who takes advantage of you or just disappoints you in general, one of the things an emotional intelligence person is, they make a decision. I want you to think about a fork in the road. You have a choice to share that disappointment, or you have a choice to suppress that disappointment. And no question, if I'm working with a top client and the stakes are really high, I don't share how I'm feeling all of the time. I make a choice to suppress that emotion in that moment. But the moment I'm calling Frank, what I will tell you,
and I will take the call.
Right. Thank you, Frank. What I'll tell you is, and I could go on and on about this for an hour, if you suppress emotions on any kind of regular basis, I can guarantee you will have a health consequence. So last year, the American Medical Association, for the first time in history, proved that your lifestyle choices are a greater predictor than anything. I got a question to go back, than anything for your health outcome. That's why I just asked us to go back and go over these. So looking at your tips to build your EQ, you're going step by step. What are your triggers? And actually, I appreciate the thought to go back. Let's stop for a second. Some of your triggers. What gets you going? And I'll describe a trigger very real. If you've ever been driving in a car and somebody cuts you off, that you start your triggers. So send me off some of your triggers. You going. You can feel your heart beating. Surprises. Okay, keep going. Come on. I need a lack of respect. People being late. One of my slackers. Someone over me. Impatience. Not. In the middle of the night. Chaos. Okay, so we've got a good list of it. So first place you're going to start is you're going to know what your triggers are. Someone steps on me, not listening to me, being condescending. This is an awesome list. By the way, we'll save this the child. And then what you want to do is say, okay, what's the way that I want to respond? The best about emotional intelligence, the best part is I don't care what the trigger is. I really do not care what the trigger is. We can all have a different trigger. You always have the choice of how to respond, no matter what. Someone's lying to you, someone's condescending, someone's yelling at you, someone's wrong, they're rude. You can fill in the blank. How amazing is it that you get to take a step back and do me a favor. Everyone put your hand on your stomach, your abdomen, a little lower than your stomach. Take a deep breath in. Breathing, by the way, it's helpful. Now let me teach you a really clear one. A deep breath in for 6. Hold it. Go for 6. On how you use these with leaders, these action items?
Certainly, yes. I do start with triggers because what I will typically do is I will conduct an emotional intelligence assessment, and the client and I will go through it. And the lower scores, we will work on what is creating that lower score, and that affect how they work every day in their profession. But also, how do those behaviors bleed into their personal lives? Because I find in coaching that professional and personal lives really do overlap. And then we'll, then if we do a 360, we'll get back from other people. Your second chevron here about how people are working in the workplace themselves. And I think the most important part of this particular slide, Wendy, is that you're asking people to say to somebody else, I really want to find out more from you about how I am. And so I ask questions of my clients about how comfortable are they speaking to others and hearing feedback which make them uncomfortable. And the first slide you pointed here goes to the old notion that someone who's emotionally well adjusted can deal with the vagaries of their emotions. And getting feedback, you have to be able to withstand it, but also give feedback in kind and in the moment.
Hang on one second. Okay. Well, Frank, let me let you drive the slide, and then I'll
certainly, yeah. Well, tips to build your EQ. Well, the one I want to go to first is the second one from the bottom. Welcome to difficult conversations. You'd be willing, if you have a strong sense of self and a strong self-regard, which are all aspects of emotional intelligence, you have to welcome differences of opinion. And differences of opinion are nothing just other than two people with a different point of view. It doesn't have to be a negative. So what intelligence allows you to come into the conversation and the situation with an openness you might not already have in place. And the other point I want to make here is that the second chevron is about the dynamics of a situation. That means that you need to adapt, you need to be open, you need to be listening, you have to be up for changing the way you are thinking and the way you're considering. So you don't want to go into a conversation of any type with a pre-written script. You want to be open to what you're about to hear. And last but not least, the third item from the bottom, manage expectations appropriately, which is sometimes it takes more than one attempt to get to where you want to go. So each one of these tips on the previous page and this page, you can sort of begin chopping away at one by one. So a robust list.
Yeah. And again, it has to do with what do you want to be when you grow up? What kind of leader do you want to be? What kind of organizations do you want to run? And, the difficult conversations for most of us are the ones that actually spur growth, right? They're the ones where somebody can share anything. And under that, this is the first time in American history we have 4 generations in the workplace. So managing a millennial, not common to be challenged. But if you're really emotionally intelligent leader, and maybe they speak in a way that you're not used to, if you're a different generation, you're going to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to take a step back, and instead of being angry, I'm be excited that they felt that they could come to me with the solution. I have a story about a leader who was smart enough, a young kid who had been at the organization, the engineering company, for a whopping 1 week. they were CEO of this engineering company and said, I have a good idea. I have a great idea. And so this emotionally intelligent leader was smart enough to take a step back and say, okay, this is totally the norm. You skip 12 layers up, but maybe there's something I can learn from this. And maybe we can teach them how to work in our organizational culture. But maybe we can also take a step back and say maybe there's something worthy of learning.
Yeah, I was going to look at a similar situation, Wendy. I have just the opposite, actually. I have a client who has low emotional intelligence. What we found is that the low emotional intelligence leads to low executive presence because it does not engender in others a sense of trust, which we talked about before. So my objective with this client is to build his emotional IQ, language, and the words in the situation, which will then further increase his presence, which will increase the way that people want to follow him and see that presence is more than about style. It's about, are you into me? Can I listen to you? And are you open to criticism and working with the rest of us?
Yeah. And I don't know if anybody remembers, but I have to tell you, I actually, everyone in my company, go watch Inside Out, if you remember the movie. I've seen it probably 20 times. If you go back and rewatch the movie, it talks about how do I speak about languages and the importance of feeling them. So it's a great reference to everything that some people are saying they love that movie. I have to say, I recently did a mandatory fun thing with my 3 grown kids. I made us sit down and watch it again. We went through a challenging family situation, and I wanted them to talk about it, and they didn't want to talk about it. And that movie, that drove the change. So let's switch it up. You go first.
Yeah, sure. Items here that if you have given to other ideas, you have to ask people what they think. Now, this is upside and downside from a very practical point of view. You need feedback from somebody who works for you, then be as honest as you want. So that's the benefits of through coaching and the work that Mel does to seek feedback from a 360, and that's a wonderful thing. But even in a moment, you can ask somebody, is logic okay? What do you think about this? You don't have to talk about it in emotional terms. You can think about very practical terms, which is what I think that's where really where the rubber meets the road. And then find out for yourself. One of the big things that East 10th Group does is they'll say just do one thing. Tomorrow when you wake up, just do one thing differently. We mentioned before about Marshall Goldsmith and the watch. He says in his book called Triggers, the hardest thing for all to do is to change behavior, which is why New Year's resolutions go out the window on January 3rd. So limit your behaviors to changing one thing, to changing anything rather. Just make it one, and realize that it's possible in the run. You're not going to get immediate gratification, not get an immediate reaction to this, but if you add it, just like training a muscle, it becomes very natural to you, and you'll begin to change just the way you approach emotions, the way you approach people, and the way you approach every day at work. It's an exercise that really makes a big difference here.
And that's such a great point. I want to just go back to the idea that we do things differently, right? So look at the triggers. We listed the triggers. Frank helped you list your triggers, right? I helped you list your triggers. And then you go to, well, I usually do this. I usually do that. I want to actually make a change. So seeking feedback is a great example. No one feels great when someone comes to you and says, I wish you would have. Yes, that sounds great. But you take a step back and say, wow, you know what? I want to get better. So thank you for sharing that. I know that, if I did we have time. Let's do a thing. I'll own this feedback, and Frank will do it together. So give us some feedback on how the web is going. Let's actually show you how emotional intelligence works. What do you think, Frank? Should we try it?
Absolutely. I'd like to hear feedback, certainly.
Good. Let's take a moment and let's do a poll. How's it going? And you send some checks off to tell us how we're doing. We've got some entertaining. We've got some helpful, like the A. Fantastic. Wow, it's going well. insightful. So we're having this great discussion. And now if I pushed you a little bit more, I think, so let's ask you, what one thing that Frank and I, and people are saying they like the dialogue, Frank. I love the radio.
Good, nice to hear. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. Talk self-help, Frank. So there's great. I'm going to give it back to Frank in a minute to do that. Dig in a bigger bit. Okay, so Frank, this is awesome. People are telling us what they want. How amazing feedback is. So Frank, can you dig in a little bit more as a leadership expert and on when you coach people, how you get them self-help?
Certainly. First, we get them the help that they need to succeed is first you understand the context in which they're operating. But I would say this is one B of two parts of number one. You have to make sure the client really wants to change behavior, that he sees a benefit in doing so. And typically, if they are willing to do that, it makes them not just a more effective leader for themselves, but a more effective contributor to the organization. So one of the things that I use, one of the graphics that I use in my coaching is the capital letter T. In the capital letter T, the vertical part is IQ. It's technical skills, is what you need to get the job done. But then you reach a certain part, a level of management, you go horizontal part of the capital letter T, and that's where EQ begins to take over. And we begin to wonder, how did that person become so successful? And it's kind of an amorphous set of capabilities, but surround the all-around emotional intelligence. So back to the question, I help clients identify those emotions, and we do role-playing, we do labeling, we do triggers that allow client to become as comfortable with themselves expressing emotions as they're likely ever to be. And what I've done several times is we do an emotional IQ like in year one, and then I'll come to year 2 or 3, and we'll do what I call a pulse check on emotional intelligence, and we'll change. So you have to know where the deficiencies are, what your strengths are, and you have to accept that you want to make some change along the way.
You know, it's great to hear Frank talk about it, so you can get a sense and you can really see how feedback works. We ask, and you tell, and then we change. It's a great example, right? If you think about it from a business point of view, if I walk into Dunkin' Donuts today and I smell coffee, what do I think? How many of you think it's real or fake? Real, fake. And I did see the question. I'll get to it in 2 minutes. Real. We've got a lot of real. So let me pop your bubble. In almost every situation, it's fake. Because when we smell coffee, we want coffee. Oh, no, yes. I hate to pop you the bubble. If I go into, I won't name the store, but some of you know it. These are some of the companies I work with, and they decide that if they make a 6, and this is true for men and women, if they change the sizing, a 6, a 4, 4, 2, a 2, a 0, or men's suit, same thing, and we feel skinnier, what might we do? We're going to buy more, right? And so when we look at seeking feedback, stores do it all of the time. They say to you, what is going to get you to buy? What is going to get you to feel better? And the more and more stronger our emotional intelligence skills are, the more we're likely to understand how they're used. Super interesting from a store point of view as well.
Right. And before we get to this last slide, you want to go back to that last point, Wendy, is that one of the real benefits of having a very solid emotional intelligence foundation is that it gives you an ability to test reality. Is this the truth? Is this the environment that I am working within? And if so, then I feel more confident in the decisions that I'm about to make.
You know, we got a great question that really a very insightful question, so thank you, about, well, but what do you deal with when you're working in an organization or that doesn't value it and actually sees emotional intelligence as a weakness? So one of the best parts about today is, listen, it's great when cultures embrace us. We love that. But you know what's great about being emotionally intelligent? It just takes you. If you have a disappointing day, or you have a day that's challenging, or you have a day where you're working in an environment that isn't ecstasy, right? The fact is, I mean, it's real, but that doesn't mean you can't become emotionally intelligent. Look, I'm going to answer by telling you, we're all going to get there. I'll use the medical example because it's the most extreme. Last year, and I've done work prior to my son being in medical school with doctors, and we look at it from a health point of view, right, a holistic point of view. They did an amazing study that found humans are 80% less likely to sue their doctor. Each doctor made a mistake if they felt compassion toward that doctor. So think about it. Don't sue people we love. We don't sue people we hate.
Right, and also on the investment management side, people are critical of the investment managers they like, even if the results are below the results that would be gained by an index fund in the marketplace.
You can think about everything, right? We could go on and on and on. I do want to leave time for questions, but if you think about this, we buy and sell on stocks. We vote. On emotions. We vote on emotions. I mean, everything is based upon how we feel. Every politician, I certainly work with them, has an emotional intelligence leader or coach, someone that they work with. So as we continue on and on, this is an overview, and I do want to make sure that I did miss two questions. You start coaching with positive feedback, strengths with negative. Absolutely great point. Some of you, they're talking the comment about compliant coaching, which puts defenses up. It's actually true. If you want a very simple read, and I mean this in a nice way, maybe you remember the book Whale Done by Ken Blanchard. It's about a 20-minute read, but we rolled it actually even for the Federal Reserve, saying, you know what, just say something nice. Just something nice, right? Many of us had grandmothers or grandfathers who said, kill a bee with honey. Comment that I did want to miss one more thing. I do address that one more comment about the person, because a few people talk about being in a negative environment. Everything that, and I know Michelle and Frank and I are very like-minded about this. That is why it's so important to pursue your own personal happiness. So for those of us that may be working in an organization that's struggling with emotional intelligence, or maybe they're struggling with changes of time, one of the things that's so great about the value that people like Frank bring is executive coaching is internally driven. I guess that's what turns me on so much about this topic is I truly get to control emotions no matter what. So longer, well, you know what? Or this did this or that did that. It doesn't matter. I get to control how I feel.
Right, because you're taking personal responsibility for controlling what you can control.
Right. It's really important. So we did get to a lot of questions. I'm happy to stop. We're not going to unmute the phones because it does get too noisy, but I do want to make sure that we leave enough time. It's empowering. Many of you did questions, but I think share the deck. Absolutely, you will get a deck. The class is being recorded. Certainly, we give everybody ample opportunity to ask questions or comments before I turn it over to Michelle for closing comments. Resources, but certainly happy to, if there's any resources particularly that you want, please feel free to ask. You can certainly send off any questions or comments to either Frank or myself. And Frank, certainly, maybe you want to say some closing words while we're waiting for some questions. I don't see any coming in right now.
Yes. The best thing about emotional intelligence is that it is such a practical, helpful approach to living and work with others that you have to think about it as something that occurs within the world of business. It occurs within the world of every being. Not too philosophical about it, but it's how people work well with each other on an everyday basis. It'll give you some stability in your life about what matters, what you want to say, and allows you to be properly assertive when you want to be. It allows you to ask the question. It allows you to make a statement that says, this is what I think, this is what I feel, in a non-judgmental way. And so what about coaching? You know, Wendy was getting into this. What I like about coaching, especially around the emotional intelligence space, is that it's so applicable and it's so practical. You see remarkable change relatively rapidly with clients. The process to it, there's a lot of assessments you can do. There's a lot of outside work on it. So it's a very rich field for coaching and discussion.
So this just came in, how do you get senior leaders to understand the importance? You know, one of the greatest things that we've learned through MRIs is emotions are contagious. So you get buy-in simply by acting as ecstatic as you possibly can, as happy, as joyful as you can. Because let me tell you, when you act that way, everybody wants it. So positive emotions are contagious and negative emotions are contagious. And for those who were asking about influencing and inspiration, you know, leadership is defined, I teach at a business school, on inspiring and influencing someone to do something. So you get on board by being an influencer, by being inspirational. I have to tell you, most of the people that I work with, that I've trained in this field, will tell you, not most of the time, but all of the time. So for those who are asking on how do you spread this, you know, I wake up in the morning and I ask myself, what emotions I want for that team? And I look, is it joy? Is it happiness? Is it ecstasy? You know, what are the emotions? And how am I going to get them on board? I'm going to start with me. I'll let Frank, the question is some assessments to use. Give one first to get what you want, so absolutely thank you for sharing that. And we've got just one more minute, Frank, because I want to turn it over to Michelle then, okay?
Yeah, the EQ assessment that I use, it's out of a firm called Multi-Health Systems. You have to be accredited to use it. And it goes back to some of the first concepts around emotional intelligence, perception, decision-making, interpersonal relationships, as I mentioned before, reality testing, and it allows you to gauge yourself against others from the same age and gender or overall, but it allows us, as Wendy's pointed out during this discussion, that it allows you to evaluate yourself against 2 and 20 top leaders who have significant emotional intelligence. And we use that, and I see it as an assessment. It's not a test. Low scores and high scores are both at issue. So try to find a balance, and above all, which Michelle could tell you, is that we tell a story. What do all these pieces mean, and where do we focus our attention to enhance your effectiveness in using your emotional intelligence? So if you look it up, go to MHS.com. They have samples of what they call EQ 2.0. And if you want more information, I'd be very willing to send you copies of that. It's not proprietary, and that evaluation. And then the most important thing, too, at EQ is that we can do an EQ for the group. We have a bunch of people take the EQ, do separate analyses and feedback, and also do it for the group as well. And it's really intriguing when you see the differences in outcomes.
Great. Thank Frank for co-hosting with me. I'm going to send right back to Michelle. You're welcome. Wow.
Great. Thank you so much, Wendy and Frank, for such an engaging afternoon. And I just want to quickly close with everybody, as Wendy and Frank commented on, we believe at East 10th Group that a great way to uplevel your emotional intelligence is definitely through coaching. And Frank would be happy to talk to you further about this. Our information is up on this slide. We're so appreciative that so many of you joined us today. And do stay tuned. We will be sharing resources with you. You'll be getting an email from us tomorrow with an article that Frank has published on emotional intelligence. And following that, we'll send you our EQ information guide. And shortly after, you'll get our slide deck as well. So thanks, everybody, so much for a great afternoon. And again, Frank and I would love to meet with you in person to talk to you about coaching, about emotional intelligence, and how we can up-level that for you and your organization.
Thank you, everybody.